So you just got a brand new box of minis, or maybe a board game that comes with miniatures, or you and your friends decided to spice up your weekly D&D session with miniatures to further immerse yourselves in your story. If you're anything like me, you probably opened up that box only to look at the gray plastic inside, look at the box art and say, whoa, I want my models to look like that. But getting started can be a pretty daunting task for beginners. Painting minis might be a relatively niche hobby, but the amount of products out there for beginners can make your head spin. I've bought my fair share of paints, glues, brushes, and tools since I got back into the hobby. Here's what I would buy if I had to start from scratch. I'm Sean. This is High Valley Hobbies. When I was putting this list together, I was a little reluctant to put a maximum dollar amount on everything for a couple of reasons. First, prices are constantly changing. What's $10 now might be $5, $8, or maybe even $12 next month. Second, everyone's budget and situation are different. You might already have some of the things I recommend, or you might be willing to throw down for the most well-stocked painting setup out there. With those caveats in mind, I think it's a good ballpark to expect to spend about $75 to $125 to get everything a beginner would need to start painting miniatures. Let's get started. First and foremost, you'll need a place to paint. This could be something like a kitchen counter, a desk, a dining table, or a workbench. The only rule you should stick to is it should be flat and large enough to fit everything you're going to be using the most. You'll also probably want somewhere to sit. I have seen people paint standing up, but I personally prefer a nice comfortable place where I can sit for a few hours at a time. I'm going to assume you at least have access to a place that has those things, but if you do have options, I prefer a table that's pretty high and a chair that can adjust so I'm not hunching over too much. I find that it helps keep my back straight and me way more comfortable over a long period of time. The next item on my list is a good desk lamp and a daylight temperature light bulb to keep my hobby space nice and well lit. This is one of the things I held out on buying when I got back into painting, and looking back, I really wish I made this one of my first purchases. Poor lighting is really bad for your eyes. Trust me, your eyes will thank you later. Any solidly built desk lamp that accepts normal sized light bulbs will probably work just fine. I prefer one that's adjustable and tall enough to not get in the way. If you need to buy a lamp, the IKEA Tertial desk lamp is a great choice, and there are several other options on Amazon that are pretty similar, and they'll all cost you about $20. You can also buy hobby-specific lamps, but those are usually way more expensive and might be a good option down the road depending on how much you paint. I personally don't have one, and I don't think I need one right now. Now, I would argue that the light bulb you put in your lamp is more important than the lamp itself. You'll want to pick up a light bulb that's both bright and daylight balanced. I bought mine at my local hardware store for about $4 each. They're about 1500 lumens, which is how bright they are, and 5000 Kelvin, which is the sweet spot for a daylight temperature bulb. Don't buy light bulbs that are labeled soft white, warm white, or anything besides daylight. Those give off a way more yellow light and can make some colors look super muted and dull compared to a daylight bulb. To get your models off their sprue without damaging them, clippers are the way to go. A good basic set like these Jurons will cost about $10. There are much more expensive options out there, but for right now, these will do the trick just fine. Just please don't push your models out with your thumbs. That is a surefire way to break delicate bits and leave deep scars where your models attach to the sprue. You'll also want a good sharp hobby knife to smooth out any mold lines and removable bits of sprue left behind by the clippers. A basic one is about $5. You'll probably want to pick up a pack of replacement blades too. The blades are really thin and the tips break pretty easily if you use them often. Superglue or plastic cement is what you'll need to glue your models together and attach them to their bases. Plastic cement like this Tamiya Extra Thin is great for working with models made out of polystyrene plastic like the ones from Games Workshop are. This costs about $10 or $12 a bottle. But if you have models made out of resin or metal or anything else, Superglue is your best friend. Any brand will do, just keep in mind that the thin stuff can be pretty hard to work with when assembling models. A bottle costs around $5. If you can only afford one, go with the Superglue. You'll also need a place to put your paint before you put it on your model. This can be something as simple as an old piece of tile or a dinner plate, but it's also a good idea to pick up a basic plastic paint palette for $1 or $2 each. I also highly recommend using something called a wet palette. It uses a wet sponge and a membrane like parchment paper to stop your paint from drying out so fast, and allows you to work on a project over multiple painting sessions without having to put new paint down each time. You can make one yourself with a bit of sponge and parchment paper. Just be sure to use paper that's not coated in anything like wax so the right amount of water can get through. But if you want to buy one, a basic Masterson's Stay Wet palette will cost you about $13. Water cups. I like using 2 of them. One only for basic acrylics and the other only for metallic paint. You really don't want to contaminate your acrylics with water that has metallic paint in it. Trust me, your grizzled warrior will look super tough covered in glitter. Use an old coffee mug, mason jar, or plastic cup here. To get that fresh paint on your models, you're going to need some brushes. For a beginner, all you'll need is a pack of good quality synthetic paintbrushes with nice sharp tips. I'd look for a set that includes a brush as small as a size 0 or even a 00, and as big as a size 4 or higher to cover everything from base coating to fine detail work. You can get a good set for like $7 at a local art or craft store or online. If you have the budget for it, you're really going to want to invest in a nice sable hair paintbrush too. For all-around use, I'd say a size 1 will do you fine. I personally use a size 0 and a size 2 when I'm working with a nice sable hair paintbrush. Prices on paintbrushes vary wildly, but I would expect to spend $15 to $25 a brush depending on the brand. Now on to the fun part, paint. This is probably the whole reason you clicked on this video. But before you buy any paint, you'll first need a primer. This might seem a little unnecessary at first, but a primer coat will help your paint bond to the model way better than just painting on the bare plastic would. That means your amazing paint job will be less likely to flake off or be damaged after normal wear and tear, or if you ever drop your model. There are lots of primer colors and options out there, but for an absolute beginner, I recommend a spray can of black primer. Spray cans are super easy to use to get a smooth coat all over your model, and black is a great starting point for most paint jobs. And an added bonus of black is that your darkest shadows are already done, so if a part of your model is super hard to reach or you just forget to paint it, you probably won't even notice because it is black already. As far as brands go, miniature-specific primers are made by companies like Games Workshop, the Army Painter, Vallejo, and a few others. Now those are all great options, but I've actually found that this Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch flat black primer works really well too, and is a good bit cheaper than those miniature-specific brands. It dries nice and matte, which I personally prefer, and goes on smooth. If you live in the US, I can pick this up at a hardware store for about $6 a can. I'm not sure if you can get the same brand overseas, but I know Guy from Midwinter Minis also uses hardware store primer for all of you not in the United States. When it comes to actual paint, the only rule I really think you should follow is buying acrylic paint made specifically for painting miniatures. Miniature paint has a high pigment density for easy coverage and is sold in bottle sizes miniature painters can easily use. Cheap craft paint might only cost $1 a tube, but it usually doesn't have a high enough pigment density to easily cover your models with an opaque layer of paint. That's not to say you can't use craft paint. I think Jay and Nick from Eons of Battle have proved you can paint models with pretty much anything, but for a beginner, I'd skip the super cheap stuff. Great for painting terrain though. Some mini painters also use artist-grade acrylics from brands like Golden, Liquitex, or Winsor & Newton. These paints are usually sold in much bigger quantities than mini paint is, and can also be a good bit more expensive. As you progress as a painter, it might be a great idea to look into some artist acrylics, but for now, stick with the mini paint. Now, I was a bit on the fence about this next part, but I'm also going to steer away from recommending any kind of transparent or contrast style paint like Games Workshop's Contrast Range, the Army Painter's Speed Paint, or any of the other options that have come to market recently. I think these are fantastic paint ranges and I love using them, but I personally think in order to unlock their true potential, a beginner would be best served by learning things like brush control and the basic concepts of highlights and shadows by using regular acrylic paints and washes first. Or I could be totally wrong. Let me know in the comments if you think I'm totally wrong. After all of that, if you are someone who is less enthusiastic about the artistic side of the hobby and would prefer to just slap some color on your model so you can play whatever game you have with painted minis, I would easily recommend picking up something like the Speed Painter's starter set. I think it's around 40 to 50 bucks depending on where you get it, and calling it good. All right, miniature paint. There are so many brands out there. All you need to know is paint brand doesn't really matter that much. Every paint range I've used has some great paints, some okay paints, and even a dud or two. There are a bunch of starter sets out there that will cover the basics pretty well. From my research, most fall in the $25 to $50 range, and some even come with minis included, which is pretty cool. I personally picked up the Vallejo Game Color starter set a few years ago and was pretty happy with it. It cost about 30 bucks, and I still use a good number of those paints all the time. The Goblin Green and Bone White are particularly good. Like I said, brand doesn't really matter a whole lot here, but I think whichever set you pick up should at least have a black, white, mid-brown, red, yellow, green, blue, a purple or a magenta color, maybe a basic Caucasian skin tone, a gold, and a silver. You'll be able to mix almost any color you can think of with those basic tones, and if you don't find a starter set you like, you can always pick up the colors you want individually, although you do usually get a bit of a discount per bottle by picking up a starter set. I'd also recommend picking up a black wash and a brown wash to add easy shading to your minis. Washes are sometimes also called shade paints and are designed to run into all the cracks and crevices of whatever you're painting to add quick and easy contrast. The Army Painter makes great washes, cost about $3 to $4 each, and are widely available at many game and hobby stores. Citadel washes are also great too, but a little bit more expensive. If you have the money for it, you can also pick up the whole Army Painter set for about 35 bucks. That covers the basics of a miniature painting setup for about $100. I also want to mention a few things that aren't essential but are definitely nice to have if it's within your budget. A painting handle is really convenient for holding your models and helps keep your fingers from touching any paint before it dries. You can buy specially made ones, but I just use an upside down plastic shot glass or a piece of cork. You can use something like poster tack or two-sided tape to adhere your model to the handle. A cutting mat will do wonders to keep whatever surface you're painting on clean and free of damage from hobby knives or the eventual paint spill. You don't need anything huge, just something that will cover underneath where you're painting or assembling models. As you gain experience, you'll probably want to expand your collection of paints and tools as you take on more ambitious projects. I know I did. My advice here is to don't go too crazy too fast. Pick up a few colors at a time from a few different paint brands and figure out what suits you and your painting style. I have about a half dozen paint ranges in my collection, and there are pros and cons to each of them. Well, that does it for my recommendations for your first mini painting setup. If you like this video, why don't you go ahead and hit that like button and maybe even subscribe. You can even hit the bell icon, which will notify you when a new video comes out. It will really help grow the channel. So what do you think of my recommendations? Let me know in the comments if you'd do anything different if you had to start over, or if I missed anything you think is essential for a beginner painter to have. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next one.